to Stories at the Ofrenda. My name is Nick. Welcome everyone to the first episode. This is something that I've been wanting to do for a while, so we're going to go ahead and test this out and see how it works. Like I said, my name is Nicholas. I am a stagehand by trade, and what that basically means is I'm used to being backstage and watching everyone else perform and talk. So, those of you who know me are probably going to be surprised because this is probably going to be the most you'll ever hear me talk at any moment. Luckily, I will eventually have some guests and everyone coming on telling their own stories, so it won't just be me the entire time, so no worries there. But yeah, I just wanted to do this first episode solo to kind of give everyone here an idea of what this is going to be. Introduce myself a little bit and kind of share why I wanted to start this podcast. So, I am basically at the point of my life where trying to figuring out what's going on due to all the fun COVID situation. Definitely had a lot of time to think about what's going on in my life and all that fun stuff. But yeah, I grew up in Utah, was born and raised, but was not raised LDS, so it was very interesting growing up in that situation where I was kind of in a bubble within a bubble, if you can imagine that. I had a lot of friends who were LDS and learned what all of that was like, but my own culture growing up was very much reserved to what I experienced around my family who was around me. I had a couple cousins and aunts and uncles who lived up here in Utah with us, and between, I'd say, the ages of around 2 and 12, it was really only us for the longest time. All of our cousins and everyone just kind of always hung out together. And so because my family was so close, I learned a lot of my culture, which is very rooted in Mexico. We had a lot of the same festivities, but not as big as some of the celebrations you might see if you were actually living in Mexico. We celebrated the different holidays there, and one that we actually didn't celebrate too much, surprisingly, was Dia de los Muertos. It's basically the Latin American version of Halloween. It takes place during those days. It's 3 days going from end of October to the first 2 days of November. And the focus of that is really to celebrate the people who have passed away. It's not really a go out and scare you kind of holiday. It's more of a you go and remember those who passed away either recently or family members and ancestors. You take the time to either go to the graveyard if you're able to and sit by their grave. You decorate it. You can set up flowers and candles, and you can leave out food for them. The main idea of Dia de los Muertos is that the spirits of those who have passed away get a chance to come back and visit everyone. And so that's why you go and you leave like their favorite food out for them to eat again. You leave out photos and reminders of them. I know for a lot of people, most of the times when they think of the Dia de los Muertos, they remember the sugar skulls, they kind of imagine all of the parties and stuff like that. What I wanted to do with creating this podcast is kind of do a virtual version of that. It's not always possible to go to certain places and remember people, so I wanted to try and have this version that you can kind of carry around and think about. That was kind of the basis of the name of the show, because the ofrenda is basically the altar where people set up their photos and memories and all that for the deceased. I would say that growing up we didn't actually make too many altars. It wasn't until a couple years back when my Abuelito actually passed away, and he was kind of the first person that my family really mourned, at least collectively. It was a very strange situation overall. just to kind of have someone that close to you pass away. And growing up, I had a few people in my life pass away, but they were either family friends or someone I didn't know very well, so it didn't really affect me that much. But with my abuelito, that was probably the catalyst of it. So, with this first episode, I want to introduce you all to who he was and kind of share a couple stories from him. So, his name was Salvador Hernandez Torres. He was born in 1932. He was a very hard worker, and when he married my abuelita, my grandmother, they had actually 11 kids. So, very large family. The oldest was my mom, and so I remember growing up, and whenever we'd go and visit my abuelito and like all of my aunts and uncles, I remember thinking it was a little strange that some of my uncles were teenagers. And the thing that usually happens with big families is you have a lot of people growing up of various different ages. And so I remember having a very distinctive view of my aunts and uncles who were around my mom's age versus my aunts and uncles who were quite a bit younger. So that was fun. He was always working. I believe up until a year or so before he passed away, my abuelito was working at like fruit stands. He would work at construction. He would work in the fields. He would do any job to provide for my family. Whenever I talked to my aunts and uncles about him, they would always say that he was always tired from working every day, but he always cared about his kids. I remember one of the first memories I actually have of my abuelito. I was around 5 or 6. He was strong enough to lift all of us up and kind of carry us on our shoulders. And I remember, because at that time, as the oldest of my family, I was always taking care of everyone else. So I remember when he would do that with us, I felt like I could relax a bit more and actually have fun as a little kid. He was always the kind of person who would have fun and enjoy being around anyone. One of my favorite things about him that I still remember very well is his voice. He had a very low, booming voice whenever he needed to get anyone's attention. And as the father of a lot of kids, he had to do that a few times to get everyone to calm down. And especially with all of the grandkids running around, I remember hearing his voice echo down the hallways to like get the little kids to calm down. He would never be angry with anyone, but he definitely knew how to use his voice to go through and make sure that he was heard and make sure that those around him understood what was going on. He would always go through, and anytime any of the kids were running around or standing in front of the TV, which was a big no-no in his house, especially when he was watching his shows, he would kind of raise his chest up a little bit, lean forward, and just in a very stern voice say "Niño," and just yell very quickly, and everyone would calm down. Everyone would sit back down, and that was that. So he had this manner of commanding respect and authority, but never in a aggressive or mean-spirited way. One of the things that I remember also was his laugh. Along with the booming voice was his booming laugh. And as strange as it sounds, his laugh was actually higher pitched than his voice, but had the same resonance in it. Whenever you got him going, or whenever he was watching anything funny, just sitting down and listening to him laugh was one of the best times I had being with him. Later on in life, him and my abuelita would actually travel back and forth between the US and Mexico to come and visit us every now and then. And they always loved to come and visit during the winter. Being born and raised in Mexico, they never really saw snow. And so I think my abuelito was just fascinated by it, which is why they would always come and visit for anywhere from a few weeks to a few months and just kind of stay up here in Utah, and see how everything changed when the snow was falling. And we'd go and visit different lakes, we'd go and drive up into the mountains, and he would have the hugest smile on his face just watching everything as we drive around. As much as he enjoyed it, my abuelita was not always the biggest fan. She did not like the cold, but she put up with him just so that they could go and enjoy their situation and just kind of enjoy the environment. He was definitely a very active person. He would always walk around everywhere. It didn't matter how far it was. It could be a few miles away, and he would go and just walk out to the store or walk out to somewhere and then come back, and it never bothered him. He would always say that he enjoys walking because he's able to see and enjoy more of what's actually around him. There were a few times where that got him into trouble. There was once when he was staying with us. It was in January, so it was fairly cold. I was around 13, 14 at that time. And I remember this was during the weekend, and so I didn't have school. I woke up, got my own breakfast, and then my mom walked in. She was looking around trying to get breakfast for everyone else ready, and then called down to everyone to come and eat. Everyone came and sat down at the table except for my abuelito. So my mom went to go and see if he was still asleep or if he had already eaten, and found out that he wasn't in his room anymore. So my mom started to get very worried. She reached out and kind of looked around in the neighborhood. He wasn't anywhere around. She had reached out to her brothers and sisters to see if they had stopped by to go and pick him up or something, but no one had seen him, no one had heard from him. And then suddenly my mom hears a knock on the door, and it's my abuelita. She turns around and starts freaking out, asking him, "Where did you go? Why were you gone so early in the morning?" And he just looks at her and goes, "I got bored. I woke up early and wanted to walk around." Turns out he walked like a good 3 miles around the neighborhood and just came back and had breakfast. So yeah, he very much enjoyed his independence, but he was also a very caring man towards his family. Later on, when almost all of my aunts and uncles had left their parents' house, it was just my abuelita and abuelita. My abuelita actually ended up going upstairs to the second floor to go and sleep because she was having trouble sleeping with my abuelito next to her because of his snoring. And as sad as that sounds, it was... he had a fairly loud snore. I could probably liken it to a train, if I'm being honest, but yeah, he was not quiet. So my abuelita would go upstairs and start sleeping up in one of the spare rooms that they had at that time. And my abuelita got a little upset. He got a little sad actually from that. He was asking her, "Do you not want to be near me anymore?" And it was very endearing to see this older gentleman who all my life was very stern and very loud to show such concern and compassion towards the women that he loved. And she just looked at him and said, No, I still love you. I still adore you. I just want to sleep." So, yeah, it was always surprising to hear any tender moments from him. Not because I didn't think that there weren't any, but in a very machismo culture, it's not recommended for men to show vulnerability. That was actually a very endearing thing to see whenever he was vulnerable and open about what was going on. He was a very adventurous person. He always loved going to the beach and swimming out as far as possible and just kind of waiting there for hours just to see how far he could go back and forth. And as adventurous as he was, my abuelita was very cautious, so she did not enjoy going to the beach and seeing him swim out so far. And every now and then he could convince her to go in at least waist deep, but that was about as far as she felt comfortable going. And that was fine between the two of them. She would kind of hang back and sit on the sand and watch all the little kids play. Meanwhile, my abuelito would be way out swimming with all the older kids and everyone else kind of racing each other back and forth. He very much enjoyed being out in the water, and some of the craziest memories that I have of him include wading back and forth, seeing how fast he was in the water, first off. It was very impressive. But also getting to the point of exhaustion and wanting to get back out of the water, and he would just egg us on, saying, "No, stay out longer. It's so much fun out here. Don't go yet." Whenever he got sick, he would always play off on how sick he really felt and how bad it was. So we always had to be mindful of whenever he got sick to actually keep an eye on him and make sure that he was actually taking the time to take care of himself. Unfortunately, as the years went by, it got harder and harder for him to accept that he couldn't do some of the things that he wanted to. He got a little weaker. He wasn't able to walk as far as he wanted to, and that was probably the thing that upset him more than anything else, was losing his independence, losing his strength. In the beginning of 2014, he ended up getting really sick, and it turned out to be pneumonia. My mom was able to go down to Mexico and be with him and take care of him for a while. I, at that time, was actually not at home. I had started working and was actually out of the state. I was up in Oregon when I found out that my abuelito was getting very sick. I would talk every now and then with my family, kind of get caught up. Beginning of March, I had heard that he had gotten better and was on the up. He was able to walk around a little bit more. He was able to stay awake a bit more and seemed to be doing a lot better, so I stopped worrying about it. Come March 10th in the morning, I got a message from my mom saying that he had passed away in the middle of the night. And it surprised me a little. I had heard that he had gotten better, and so I had stopped worrying about it. I had stopped thinking about him. And so to randomly get this text in the morning, it didn't feel real. It felt like my mom was mistaken or she meant to say something else. So I called her and found out that she was telling the truth. He had gone to sleep and was feeling pretty bad when he went to bed, but he just fell asleep and didn't wake up. What I do appreciate is that all of my mom's siblings and their families were actually in Mexico with him, so they were all able to be around him when he passed away. The thing that sucked, though, was that I was far away from all of my family. I was in a completely different state, and I wasn't able to take the time off to go and visit anyone, either to go back to Utah and talk with my family there or to go down to Mexico. So I had to deal with the loss by myself. It was very strange to imagine going back to Mexico and not see him at the door. It was not something I wanted to think about, and honestly, for the first while, I didn't think about him being gone. It wasn't until later on that summer that we went to go visit everyone in Mexico that I suddenly remembered, oh yeah, Abuelito's not here anymore. It was very hard to accept that he was gone, but I think what was harder was to still see his picture around. I don't have a lot of photos of my relatives, especially not any recent ones, but a lot of the photos of my abuelito were suddenly popping up everywhere. My mom found one of him and set it up on the kitchen table. All of my cousins and everyone were posting photos of them with him. It wasn't something I wanted to think about. We had a mass for him when we all were down there in the summer. At the mass, we actually were able to take his ashes and have them placed in the church. And I remember sitting there looking at all of my relatives and thinking, I don't want to be sad about this. I looked around and I saw all of my mom's sisters and my cousins were all sitting together crying. My uncles were talking to each other and supporting each other that way, but I fell back from all of that because I didn't want to be vulnerable at that moment. After some time, I started to actually think about him and have all of the past memories come up and start to actually see them in a positive light again. Come October, my mom actually did set up an ofrenda with him on it. And at first, I didn't want to go and see it. I thought it was weird to suddenly put one up, seeing as we had never done it before. After some time, though, I realized this is a very much needed part of the process, is to be able to see him more regularly, to look at his photo, just remember him as how he was, not where he is right now. To go through and remember the straw hat that he always wore every day, to remember the sound of his voice, to remember what he was like when he was here. That, I would say, is the best thing that came out of him passing away, was holding on to those memories and realizing that those are the things that matter the most. It didn't matter that he wasn't going to see me as I am now. It didn't matter that he wouldn't know how I'm like now versus how I was when I was little. What mattered most was I knew him and I remember him, and that is something that will never be taken away. The main point of this podcast is to remember people, but it's also to go through and think about how you've changed over time. There are many people whose passing away affects you more than you realize, and it's not until you take the time to sit back and think about it that you can see it. I don't consider people passing away now as a solely negative thing. Yes, I do still miss people. I have lost a lot of people, and I know those of you who are listening probably have too, especially recently. Loss is something that never actually goes away over time. And there are moments where it seems like it'll suddenly build up and be too much. But there will also be moments where you sit back and realize the people who came and left are still with us in some way. So yeah, I hope you all enjoyed learning about my abuelito. And if you are at all interested in sharing your own stories, feel free to email me at storiesattheofrenda@gmail.com. And hopefully you guys haven't gotten tired of hearing my voice yet. Thankfully, other people will come and speak, so it won't just be me the whole time. I hope everyone has a fun week, and stay safe, and I will see you all next time.